Introduction. It's always a pleasure to be here in this premier institution of research in this country. I myself had the privilege over decades to be associated with this institute, even when I was a student at the Physical Research Laboratory working in the group of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. And we used to come here for planning our experiments with balloons, where we flew some instruments for the early research work related to X-ray astronomy. And TATA Institute, of course, Dr. Professor P.V. Srikandan at that time was one of the key centers initiating the work on the X-ray astronomy research. And I had the privilege, of course, of visiting, meeting, and many times hearing the lectures of very eminent personalities at this institute. And in a sense, the inspiration that I received both from this institute and the environment of the Physical Research Laboratory, primarily created by Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, here it was Dr. Homi Baba, and then it was Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, certainly influenced my outlook and life in the subsequent years. It's always therefore something I owe to this institute for what I am today. I will briefly give a preamble to my talk on the national education policy itself. I start with a little introduction to the background that we went through in deciding on this. As you know, that this government in its previous avatar felt it necessary that we should really look at the education policy, which was then based on a policy that was enunciated 25 years earlier. In fact, it was 1986 and 1992 where the modifications, improvements were done on that policy. And the earlier one, even 1968. They were all exceptional instruments, exceptional documents in which the educational direction for this country was laid out in terms of policies. Several transformative changes that has happened in the education in this country came out of those earlier documents. And the present government thought that it is appropriate after 25 years that we revisit these documents, these policies, primarily because of some of the reasons. I am only giving a flavor of these reasons. One is, of course, the extensive changes in the society since the last policy, social, economic, industrial, cultural, each with its own ramifications to the education. Increasing and ubiquitous technology, internet and its dominance was not foreseen during the preparation of the last policy. The fourth industrial revolution currently underway has its own ramifications on education. Alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 4, seeks to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all by 2030. Understanding the pitfalls in the implementation, as I told you earlier, there had been exceptionally good recommendations in the earlier documents, which unfortunately could not be implemented in the totality. Certainly we had to revisit that, look at it, make the necessary changes as needed in the present context, and then recast it and again present it to the country. And of course, I was told very clearly by the then Human Resource Development Minister, Mr. Javadekar, that we should have a policy which should be varied at least, which should hold on at least for 2 decades. And with fine tuning, it should go even for a 3rd decade. So there was another thing. So we had to look ahead for the next 2 decades and beyond. And we had to factor the fact that this is something which should be pragmatic. There's no point in giving daydreaming. It's a recommendation which the country will be difficult to implement. And that was one of the key considerations. And ultimately, to make sure that this is done, of course, at the time when we discussed this question and when we wanted to set up this committee, he said we will do it in 6 months. Of course, it finally took more than 1.5 years to carry out this exercise. The policy journey itself, we formed a central committee. I had some of the very eminent people in the committee, like Manjul Bhargav, a field medalist from Princeton University, we should be knowing him. And there are several other people, vice chancellors, people with experience in tribal education, people with the rural background, school education, languages, and things of that kind, So it has been a very interesting committee, a committee with a set of people whose background is not something you usually find in this kind of the bringing together the experts, but they had their own role to play in this particular education because of the emphasis the government wanted to give in certain areas. Of course, we also had a drafting committee, Manjul Bhargava, K. Ramachandran Anurag Beher, who is the Vice Chancellor of the Premji University, Leela Chandran Madhya, who is also associated with this institute. So they were the members of the drafting committee. And then we had a process. We of course had a long list, even though the original document which was made as a part of this exercise, which was done by T.S.R. Subramaniam, was carrying several amount of consultation, discussion, and even before that, as a preparatory to that particular document, there was even grassroots level consultations. But importantly, we had to, when we re-looked at this particular thing, we thought that in the context of many other dimensions that we need to address in formulating the education policy, we need to have much more discussion with educators, researchers, policy makers, sector experts, industry, academics. So there was a whole host of people, individuals and collectively, with whom we engage in the context of getting their own inputs. Then there were consultations with 78 organizations. These organization associations and things of that kind, they covered a very vast segment of the society, diverse aspects of the society, whether it is religious, whether it is related to economic, whether it is related to industrial, and so on and so forth. And of course, we also came in contact with something like 200 and odd individuals who offered to share their experience. They were really some of the people who have given their lifetime in the way of education. So we had the benefit of sharing and making sure that their thoughts and their ideas are shared with us. And we also created a system of peer reviewing this kind of a document. Became very fairly exhaustive, but there were several points on which we wanted to see even then expert opinion. So we put a set of peer reviewers like Prakash Narayan, a very active person in school education in Hyderabad, P. Ramarao, well known to you, Rajput Vijay Kelkar, and so on and so forth. Dinesh Singh, former Vice Chancellor of Delhi University, Mohandas Pai, whom you know. So these were the people who acted as peer reviewers, besides many others with whom we consulted. And of course, as I said, we also consulted the earlier documents, both policies as well as the preparatory work that has been done in this connection. Now, what are the policy elements that we have addressed? This gives you a quick snapshot of the various elements that we have touched upon in this particular policy formulation. We give quite a lot of importance to the early childhood care and education, ECCE, and there is a lot of research that has been done in the cognitive sciences, neural sciences, and so on. So they came into picture in formulating ECCE. We'll see a little bit of it later. School education, we had to recast the school education to make it sure that it is developmentally apt. So that is the main change that we have brought in the case of school education, and then correspondingly the durations, the segmentation, these were appropriately discussed in the context of the development of the child and the brain growth at different stages of the child. That was one of the major considerations in the context of school education. Then moving into higher education, the undergraduate education, the only point I would like to say is a major recommendation with respect to bringing in the concept of liberal education into the undergraduate education. And then postgraduate education, where masters and PhD is there. And most importantly, the fact that we have recommended a very important component of strengthening the research system in the higher education, the National Research Foundation. I'm happy to say in today's Finance Minister's speech, the NEP elements have been touched upon, that the government is seriously thinking of how to now translate it into concrete actions. And the Honorable Finance Minister went into great details about the National Science Foundation, which came out of this particular study. And she said that the government proposes to institute a mechanism for creating this and operationalizing it with funding, not only from the central government with the main ministry, but also from many other ministries and other institutions which are interested in the research area. So it's a happy thing. Just only few years back, the Finance Minister made these announcements with regard to the national education policy, which also shows that the government is very serious in now pursuing the various recommendations that are made with, of course, the appropriate changes that the public domain feedback that we would have got in the last month and maybe one more month we will get. And of course there are the questions of adult education and that leading to lifelong thing. I'll say a little bit about the early school education. This I would like to context it with respect to the 85% brain development. You know, one of the things that we really looked into the early part of the education is the 10+2 and the rationale for the 10+2 and the type of understanding we have got now of the development of a child, particularly the brain development of the child. And taking that into account, we have formulated the early part of the child education, a strategy and a policy, which is what I have tried to summarize here. What is important is the quality early childhood care and education to be made available to all children between the ages of 3 and 6 years. This is where the 85% of the brain development does take place, and they have to be given the necessary stimulation during this age, which is particularly significant. The Anganwadi workers also have to be actually the process of learning for a child starts right on the day it is born. We recognized it, we discussed it, and we also consulted very active workers in the area of brain research for children, especially Dr. Vinita Kaur from Delhi, and we got some very interesting insights into how these kind of scientific basis could translate itself into specific policy framework for early education. That's where we have put the Anganwadi workers to be trained to cover the 0 to 3 year. When the child spends time at home, how exactly do you orient the child? Because there's also a critical period so far as bringing in the level of education is concerned. Multi-pronged approach to integrating Anganwadis and preschools into primary school. This is another important area because Anganwadi, as you know, is primarily putting emphasis on health and nutrition. And the educational component is a little weak in the present system. Certainly it is there. So special attention needs to be done. And then the Right to Education Act, which has been there from 6 years onwards, now we have recommended that it shall be extended down to 3 to 6 years also. And ultimately, the early childhood education part of it will be under the Ministry of Education, but with suitable integration with the other ministries which are responsible for health and nutrition. You can just see the kind of brain, the one that has been stimulated in the early phase, the 3 to 6 years I have been telling, and that is what you see on one side of the healthy brain, and on the other side an abused brain which has not been stimulated, and one can see very clearly the importance of the early stimulation of the brain, and this means the variety of things, tasks that you carry out with respect to the child, and its ability to comprehend it, ability to understand it, ability to recognize the environment in its different facets. These are questions that have been addressed, and the emphasis on 3 to 6 years and also extendable up to 8 years is something which has been very seriously considered in the context of early school education coming from these scientific considerations. The other aspect is the question of a foundational literacy and numeracy. The important aspect of this crisis, it is slowly assuming crisis proportions. The conclusion is that if we don't take into account the fact that foundational literacy and numeracy up to the grade 5 or so, if we don't take into account the question of the learning crisis of language and mathematics, you see how many youngsters drop out in this early phase, mainly because of the fact of our inability to recognize that the brain doesn't grow uniformly all across uniformly. So you have to have specialized attention to children with different level of development. That is exactly what we are trying to address here. Every child in grade 5 and beyond must achieve foundational literacy and numeracy, and there are a number of steps we have identified as to how we do this. And then the question of making sure that there is also a 3-month school preparation module for grade 1 students with respect to connecting them from the early school education. That's the second part of it. Of course, there are 2 interesting suggestions that we have made in trying to make sure that this segment, these children also receive very specialized attention if their brain growth is such that they are not been able to master certain areas. For example, a good mathematical student with good mathematics understanding, not doing well in science or in literature. These kind of things, how do we deal with? How do we try to bring in some level of parity between these developments of the various children? And up to the age of 8, I am telling, where the prescriptive part of that ability takes over. National Tutors Program, here you focus on peer tutors and remedial instructional aids program for first 10 years now, at least instructors from the local community. These are both important recommendations that you have made, which makes use of the local capabilities and local talents, and also bring in certain level of interaction between the school system and the local community. And of course, social workers and counselors also help in the whole process. The next one is an universal access and retention. I won't go too much into the details of it, except for the fact this also requires that we have the RTE Act extended right up to grade 12. So this is another important. So in a sense, we are having an RTE now, which is from 1 to 12. What we are trying to do is to have an RTE Act which starts at the age of 3, and it will go up to 18 years, which is the equivalent to the grade 12. So this is the other part of it. The important thing is the ability to have a universal access to education and its retention. And there are several steps that we have suggested in the context of how do you track the dropouts, how do you track the attendance, make the school more interesting, deal with social and cultural issues like child marriage, migration and so on. These have been very carefully analyzed and addressed as policy framework in the document. In some terms of all these things, a new curricular structure. The present system that we are recommending, taking into account the various aspects of the development thing, I may only summarize this by telling that the current research on early childhood education, care and education indicates that children up to 8 years do not follow the linear age-based educational trajectory prescribed to them by policy or any preset timelines. Children in the preschool grade 1 and 2, that is the first 5 years, are not receiving developmentally appropriate education in the present context of things. Children are more adept to prescriptive learning beyond 8 years. If you take this as the basis, and which is so based on the inputs that we have from the scientific evidences, the new structure based on cognitive and social emotional development stages, where the stages will correspond to the ages 3 to 8, 8 to 11, 11 to 14 and 14 and 18. So there are these 4 elements which we have tried to summarize the foundational stage as we call it, which is the pre-primary and educated grades of 1 and 2, rapid brain development, that is the characteristics of that stage. Play and active discovery therefore becomes more appropriate for that part of the education. Preparatory stage, which is 3 to 5, build on play and discovery, transition to structured learning, that goes in this period, which is the preparatory stage. Middle stage, which is the grade 6 to 8, concepts and subjects, navigating adolescence. And finally, secondary stage, which is the 9 to 12, last 4 years of school education, preparation for livelihood and higher education. Curricular framework and classroom pedagogy will be correspondingly created based on this structure. So this is one of the major recommendations we have made in the context of the school education, based on many of the considerations just I had mentioned a little earlier. The transformation of curriculum and pedagogy correspondingly certainly is the other aspect of it. Curriculum to develop language proficiency, scientific temper, science of aesthetics. These are some of the important things that we have tried to introduce into the curriculum as a part of the early school education. And also this would call for a revision of the national curriculum framework. One of the very finest documents that has supported the education system at the school level so far. And this is by 2020 to be made available in all languages. And what are the main features of this kind of a new curriculum and pedagogy? One is an integrated curriculum. No hard separation of curricular, co-curricular or extracurricular activities, equal status for all. No separation between arts and sciences, integration of vocational and academic streams. Flexible curriculum provides means or choices for students, reduced curriculum load, emphasis on key aspects, essential ideas, space for experiential learning, allow for analysis and reflection, And ultimately, the approach to assessment itself will undergo correspondingly the changes in modular board exams to test core concepts and skills along with higher order capacities. So there is again a major change in the way we want to recast the curriculum and correspondingly the pedagogy. School teachers, now there is quite a lot of interest in knowing how this will be all going to be done and the type of teachers that we need and the type of numbers that are involved in this and the magnitude of the task that is there to create those kind of teachers. So there have been quite a bit of discussion on this question of how to create these teachers that are needed in the context of new curricular structure, new pedagogical approaches and so on and so forth. The first important thing is the teachers have to be qualified with BE degrees to be taught in universities as a specific 4-year undergraduate program. The long term, which I am talking of, is about 10 years. This is the direction in which the school teacher education has to go, preparing the school teacher education. Teacher education dealt with this will come a little later. The most important process so far as the recruitment is concerned, redesign teacher eligibility test followed by interview, teaching. These are all some of the things that are overlooked currently in the choice of the selection of teachers. Teachers will be recruited to district and appointed to school complex. The school concept of a school complex will come a little later. Teacher career development is another part of it. Then continuous professional development is other. I have put down some few points on the flexible and modular approach where teachers choose what they and how they want to learn something, which is extremely important to bring the creativity among the teachers, which currently doesn't exist. They simply do the rote learning process. No centralized determination of curriculum, no cascade model of training or no rigid drops. Academic support institutions like SCERT, diets and things like that, we need to rejuvenate them, make them much more effective in the context of the new demands of the teachers. Adequate physical infrastructure, learning processes, these are all today they are highly inadequate in the context of supporting the teacher education teacher system. What are how does it look like the present schooling system? The policy takes into consideration large numbers of small schools that are isolated and function without adequate resources and support. You can see that there is now a near universal enrollment of children in primary schools. Most disadvantaged children also have access to primary school. Gender parity has also been achieved. However, if you look at the actual numbers with respect to not the access, but in terms of the numbers, nearly 28% of primary schools and 14.8% of upper primary schools have less than 30 students. Highly suboptimal. Average number of students per grade is 14, and the actual number in many cases, in large number of cases, is even less than 6 in a school. In 2016-2017, there were nearly 120,000 single teacher schools. Despite the access, there are issues of small schools that need to be supported. How to end isolation of small schools, how to make the use of resources optimal among the number of schools. So these are the questions that were addressed, and how do we make sure that there is an optimal approach to school education where the resources that are available, they are scattered and in many cases at individual location highly inadequate. How we could make an integrated approach to make them more optimal. So that is where we bring in the idea of school complexes, effective administration and management. School complex as a minimum viable unit of school governance. That's what we have recommended. What is a school complex? Cluster of around 30 public schools from a foundational to secondary stage within a contiguous geography. Must have one secondary school and all other neighborhood public schools. And the school complexes, as I said earlier, they will provide effective administrative unit without compromising access, will not require physical relocation of schools, enable sharing of learning resources, example laboratories, libraries, these are not available to every school, so we need to look at how do we share this, enable sharing of subject teachers. There are many subjects that we have recommended in terms of options available in a schooling system. Teachers for sports, music, art teachers, counselors and social workers. So we need to have sharing of these kind of capabilities. Create community of teachers to work together, support each other and ensure. This is another thing. The teacher isolation really affects the functioning of the teacher herself or himself. So this is one of the things. You bring in a community concept to the teachers so that in a complex, they support each other, they consult each other, and they work with each other to get the best of the outcomes. Create coherent set of educational institutions in each geography. So there are of course the structures for management, the school management structures, school complex management structures. This will all be the fallout of this kind of a complex concept that we have done. I may also mention that the Kothari Commission, the earlier report, had also suggested the school management complex, school complexes as one of the way to optimize our resources in the schooling system. But unfortunately, it did not make much of a headway in terms of implementation. We have revisited it, we have recast it, and we have made sure that this good concept is carried forward in the context of the new education policy. Regulation is other part of it. There are a lot of questions that we have received in the last 1 month regarding the type of the regulation that we are going to have. Regulation and operation of schools is to be carried out by separate bodies to eliminate conflict. There are conflicts in the way in which currently the regulation and operation. The new state school regulatory authority, independent statewide body created for each state. This is one that is there. It will be a part of a national system that will be there for regulation. A CERT will be charged, you are all knowing what the CERT is. So School Council for Educational Research and Technology will be charged with academic matters of school education and develop a school quality assessment and accreditation framework, which will be used by the accreditation framework by the school SSRA, the new school regulatory authority itself for regulation. Directorate of School Education will focus only on the operations of the school, the quality outcomes of the school operation, the availability of the necessary infrastructure and all other resources, and running it in the proper way on a day-to-day basis. That will become the direct responsibility of the Directorate of School Education. Sample-based National Achievement Survey, which is already there, learning levels to continue, that will continue. State may continue to conduct a census-based state assessment survey. Boards of certification, examination, certification of school publication, no role in determining, they will conduct examinations as per the framework of the curriculum and so on, but they will have no role in determining curricula and textbooks. Public and private schools are regulated on the same criteria, the benchmarks and the processes. Equitable and inclusive education for every child in the community. This is again, the policy aims to shape the education system that benefits all of India's children. So there is a number of prescriptions which lead to policies with regard to equitable and inclusive education in the context of which is a very critical element so far as the policy is concerned, because there are still major issues with regard to highly disadvantaged regions and underprivileged children, and the kind of system that we need to bring in, like special education, so national funds and funding support for identified districts and things of that kind, and also the corresponding teachers who are to be recruited. You have to focus on underprivileged group, creation of inclusive school environments, inclusive curriculum. So there is a whole host of things that we have tried to identify, try to give some idea as to how they can be brought into picture on the ground, and the type of resources that also we have calculated and feel that this is an urgent area involving investments to be carried out on the school education part of it. I go now next to, this is just to give you a summary and a flavor of what the school education is. I'll go now to the higher education. Before I go to the actual higher education, I would like to bring in some of the elements of the higher education with respect to which we need to address the deficiencies in this. Over 93% of undergraduate enrollment is in state universities today. Extreme fragmentation, nearly 1,000 universities, 38,000 colleges, and over 10,000 standalone institutions educating 36 million students. 40% of colleges teach only a single discipline, a large part of which are teacher education colleges. Nearly 20% colleges have enrollment below 100, and only 4% have enrollment above 3,000. Too many silos and too much early specialization, streaming of students with disciplines, lack of access in socio-economic disadvantaged areas is another major issue, lack of teacher and institutional autonomy and inadequate mechanisms for career progression of faculty. This is a very serious issue with respect to the autonomy, to the degree to which a teacher can bring his own creativity or his own creativity in the context of teaching, whether it's the pedagogy and so on. And also there are many uncertainties in the context of career progression for the faculty. The lack of research culture is another major area, and ultimately, of course, poor regulation. You know the type of colleges that today, the typical turnout teachers and the type of fake colleges which also turn out education with degrees of doubtful authenticity. So this is what we have kept it in mind with respect to what we need to address as a part of the higher educational system. What we have tried to recommend here is first consolidation of the current 900 odd universities, 1000 universities in some of the numbers, and 40,000 colleges to about 15,000 large, well-resourced, vibrant, multidisciplinary institutions. The higher educational institution in HEI is to move towards becoming one of the three types of institutions we have tried to recommend. Research universities, equal focus on research and teaching. There are many institutions in this country, whether you call them IITs, whether you call them law schools, I will call them central universities, and now ISROs and things of that kind. They have the necessary model or necessary mechanisms to slowly transform themselves into the type of concept that we are propounding for a research university. Of course, initially they can also become teaching universities where the primary focus is on teaching with significant focus on research. That is because of the fact that research has to go along with teaching in order to improve the quality of teaching, and also for the undergraduates to receive the best of the teaching from people who do research also. But that doesn't mean that we cannot have institutions where the teaching is the priority, but best of the teaching, best of the curriculum and pedagogy, so and also turning out graduates, undergraduates who have a very high demand in the job market. So the whole educational configuration for these degree granting colleges are one on focusing undergraduate education and research, but with a clear-cut direction that they can find easy way of getting absorbed into the job market and other kind of useful functions within the society. Significantly expand reach and capacity by building strong educational communities. All higher educational institutions to become multidisciplinary institutions with teaching programs across disciplines and fields. Mission Nalanda and Mission Takshashila, of course, have put it a specific name for these kind of teaching universities and research universities. High quality institutions also on the disadvantaged geographies, and ultimately substantial public investments are needed in the context of ensuring that we have these objectives met. I'll come to one of the specific area with respect to the undergraduate education, and that is the policy envisaging an imaginative and broad-based liberal undergraduate education with rigorous specialization in chosen disciplines and so on. What I here mean is that you are really talking of critical thinking, communication skills, aesthetic sensibilities, and so on and so forth, and areas like scientific temper, history, diversity, knowledge about India, constitutional values. There are several things on which today we don't have a clarity. Many of the youngsters who are turning out of the institutions, they don't seem to have that kind of a broader knowledge, and which also can be connected to their future professions with appropriate, seeing the linkages between these pieces of knowledge and the main knowledge that they pick up for their profession. For example, the critical thinking here, what I mean is studies of statistics, data analysis, quantitative methods, or communication skills, the questions of writing and speaking and communicating, that's a very critical area. Aesthetic sensibilities like music, visual art, and so on. So these are all the components of what we today call as a liberal education. So what we have recommended is a liberal education with broad multidisciplinary exposure. This is one of the key elements of changing the undergraduate education: imaginative and flexible curricular structures, creative combinations of disciplines of study, multiple exit and entry points, and master's and doctoral education provide research-based application. Now, what does it translate in terms of the number of years of undergraduate education? 3 to 4 year undergraduate degree with multiple exit options. One of the important aspects of this kind of undergraduate education Normally it's a 4-year program. You can have a Bachelor of Science, you can have a Bachelor of Arts and so on, or Bachelor of Education in chosen major and minor. So you have the concept of major subjects and minor subjects. But on the foundational aspect of this kind of a 4-year program is the liberal education, of which I said the characteristics. The 3-year program will be a subset of this. You can live with a bachelor's degree. The previous one can be a bachelor's with honors or a bachelor's with research. 3-year program can be a bachelor's degree. Both 3 and 4-year programs lead to degree with honors with research work. And exit can also be there in the 2nd year of with an advanced diploma or a 1st year with a certificate. What is important is, so you have exit possible in all the 4 years of an undergraduate program with the specific expertise which you can gain based on your own choices and the availability, like vocational education in the 1st year, you can pick up a few of them. And so it's not that you won't be able to find a job or that you don't have any proof that you studied the 1st year of undergraduate education. You get a certificate, then a diploma, then a degree, then maybe a degree with honors and things of that kind. And also the important thing is that if you want to re-enter the education at any of these points at which you left the education, you have the necessary provisions for again coming back to the education and make a re-entry. So with certain minimal preparations for the re-entry, you should be able to continue your study which you had left, say, a few years earlier. So you have both the exit and the entry possible in the 4-year undergraduate education, but each year you specify capabilities with which you excel so that you have still a relevance in terms of your role in the society. Flexible master's degree, 2 years with those with 3-year undergraduate, 1 year for those with 4-year undergraduate degree, and ultimately a 5-year integrated program. So these are the 3 other aspects with respect to the master's program. The student support and learning development is the other part of it. The National Higher Education Qualification Framework for articulating this. National studies on with respect to the regular education, national skill qualification, these are the other aspects of it. And students assess not only in the academic but also in the broad capacities, open and distance learning, internationalization, inter-university center for international education to be set up with it. So these are the other elements which are part of which is student support, part of which are the general aspects of the other dimensions of the education that we are considered. Energized, engaged and capable faculty is other part of it, and some of the important issues that we have tried to highlight here is the rampant practice of contractual appointments. Contract and ad hoc, especially block hour basis, needs to be phased out. Very heavy teaching loads need to be rationalized to give faculty time to invest in themselves. Infrastructural support, most faculty do not have even staff rooms in many institutions, so one can see the level to which the faculty find themselves comfortable in the environment in which they will teach. Faculty recruitment and development plan, career progression and compensation management to be part of every institutional development plan announced by the higher education institution. So every higher education institution, they have a level of autonomy, and this autonomy also will come in the context of deciding on the career track for the faculty, and these kind of career progression and compensation management will be an integral part of that kind of an institutional development plan. Appropriately designed permanent employment tenure track system to be in place in all institutions by 2030. Faculty to be autonomous, empowered to make curriculum choices and conduct assessment of students. Infrastructure for continuous professional development for all faculty to be strengthened, and career paths for education in administration, teacher education and so on will be a part of the career track that you will have for the teachers or the faculty. Now we come to another important area, and this I am happy to say was one of the items on which the Honorable Finance Minister today in her address did make an announcement. This is the catalyzing and energizing research and innovation across the country in all academic disciplines with particular focus on this. You know the present situation with respect to the research, and particularly in research in state universities. The whole idea of the National Research Foundation is to strengthen the research system in the universities. But at the same time, it doesn't forbid the general research activities in the country to be also supported by this foundation. And the most important thing is it has several functions to carry out. a fund to research in all universities and colleges so that the synergies between research and quality education can be leveraged maximally, one of the key elements. NRF will fund research across all disciplines and significantly expand research and innovation at all universities and colleges, including private institutions. You have four major divisions to start with: sciences, technology, social sciences, arts and humanities, with provision to create more. What will be the scope of work like? One is, of course, funding research through competitive peer review based